Good day, everybody. My name is Brandon Sharpie, and I'm the Executive Director of the International Association for Conflict Management. And I want to thank you all for joining us today for what's certain to be a phenomenal event in our next installment of the IACM Virtual Speaker Series. Before we get started, I want to touch upon a few items within IACM itself. I have two quick announcements. The first is a reminder to check out our Open Access Platinum Journal, Negotiation and Conflict Management Research. Our OA journal is published through Carnegie Mellon University. It has continued to see its ranks rise and its impact factor rise since being OA Platinum, so certainly worthwhile to look at. I've just posted a link in the chat box if you want to explore it further. The second item, today marks the opening for our call for papers going live for IACM 2024 in Singapore. The conference will be hosted at INSEAD. It'll run from June 23rd through 26th, 2024. So mark that on your calendars, June 23rd through 26th, because those dates are slightly earlier than we typically host that conference. You can view the call for papers and submit your session in the link I just provided in the chat box. So let's move on to what you're all here for. Because of the large turnout, today's event is going to be placed in a webinar format. So what this means is that your engagement amongst attendees is restricted to the chat box and the question and answer box on your toolbar within Zoom. So please be aware that these are two distinct areas within Zoom. We encourage you to discuss what you'd like to amongst your colleagues here today in the chat box. However, if you do have questions that you want to pose to our speaker, we'd like you to pose them in the Q&A box. We will address several of those questions towards the end of the session. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce you to today's speaker, Debra Shapiro, who is the Clarice Smith Professor at the University of Maryland. Now, if I went through all of Debra's accolades and achievements, we'd run out of time for this webinar. So we're just going to highlight a few items within Debra's distinguished career, including being a former president of the Academy of Management, division chair of the Conflict Management Division, representative on AOM's Board of Governors, a fellow of AOM, an executive committee member for the Society of Organizational Behavior. Beyond Debra's extensive service is excellence in both research and in the classroom. Debra's won 6 conference best paper awards, published in countless A journals, has published 2 books, has over 24,000 citations. And beyond that, she's won several teaching awards between her time at UNC Chapel Hill and the University of Maryland. Now, last but certainly not least, at least in my estimation, Debra is the 2023 recipient of IACM's Lifetime Achievement Award. If you did not get a chance to view Debra's acceptance speech, we encourage you to view it on the following YouTube link after this session, not during, please. I just posted that in the chat box. So on behalf of IACM and our community here today, I want to thank Debra for all of your achievements and dedication to our field and in the classroom. And at this time, I'm going to hand it over to Debra Shapiro.
Well, thank you, Brandon, very much. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me fine. You can? Good. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm happy, very happy and honored to be the 2023 recipient of IACM's very prestigious Lifetime Achievement Award. Previous winners of this award are intellectual heroes of mine. And so it's really very meaningful to me that you chose to give that kind of recognition to me. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about how I go about choosing my own research puzzles. I try, it doesn't quite always happen, but I think a pretty high frequency of time it does. I try to choose puzzles that are high both in relevance and rigor. Those two attributes are often described as a trade-off. So the question of how to get both into our research puzzles is something that I think a lot of people, certainly you, for being here, I think, are interested in. So let me jump to it. And I'm going to start by asking you a question. If I can get my screen to advance. There we go. And I believe this is a poll for you to answer. Should scholars avoid or embrace events reported in the news as sources of inspiration for the puzzles they pursue? So as sources of inspiration for the puzzles they pursue, say A if you think avoid, say B if you think embrace. And we're going to run this poll a little bit longer, see where the answers go. So far, it looks like embrace is winning. Looks like not everyone quite has chosen. Give your honest answer, not what you think is what most people think. Okay, 82% so far have answered, and there's a clear trend here, which is most of you think that this should be embraced. I'm going to actually ask you, Brandon, to stop the poll.
Yep, the poll stopped and it's shared so they can see it.
Okay, so share results. So I don't need to touch any of these buttons, right? All right, so I'm just going to go on and tell you what I think are the issues here. I believe that if, and it's a big if you equate using news-sourced events to guide research puzzle selection with being theoretical, which is to say, not relying at all on theory to guide your puzzle choices, you probably, under those circumstances, would have said that this should be avoided. And I have to say, without naming anybody, I have heard in presentations, formal presentations, sometimes to doctoral students, I have heard in a variety of settings, I have heard very respected academics justify the choice of A for that very reason. But I'm going to give you another if. If you equate using news-sourced events to guide research puzzle selection with being relevance enhancing, then you would have chosen B. So I'm going to ask you another question. Should scholars use academic journals as their primary source of puzzle selecting inspiration? And if yes, should these journal sources be only A journals? And I mean only A. So this is another poll. Think about what your choice is and answer. This is actually, there's still a clear trend, but there's more variance among you on this question. If you've not answered yet, you still have a little time. Okay, I think we should stop the poll now, Brandon, and you can share with them what the results are.
It's shared. They can see.
Oh, they can see it. Okay, so a clear majority of you, 80% of you, think no is the answer to this question. So here's my thinking on it. If you equate citing ideas in A journals with being theory guided, that would support the need, if you want to be theory guided, to rely on only A journals. But if you equate citing ideas in all peer refereed journals with being theory guided, then you would have chosen no. So the first two questions really force, I think, a conversation around what precisely is an A versus non-A journal, particularly if it's guiding what you read and what you cite to guide your own thinking. So an A journal is a peer-reviewed journal. It's a journal with a high impact factor, typically 4 or higher, and it's consensually agreed on as A. In contrast, a non-A journal, oops, I said in contrast, but so far I'm seeing the same thing. It's a peer-reviewed journal. It's a journal with high impact factors. In fact, some journals deemed non-A have higher impact factors than some of the journals deemed A. But consensually, a non-A journal is agreed on as non-A. So another difference is, and I know you all probably know this from your own academic experiences, that the A journal publications get counted and the non-A ones typically don't. Of course, this is less extreme in some schools than in others. But I ask you now, really? When two of these three criteria for distinguishing A from non-A journals are identical, we think that's a good practice? I know we all complain about it, but it continues. And it continues in part because collectively we've done nothing to stop it. But the bottom line is the only difference between the A and the non-A is consensus, because they're both peer reviewed and they both have not all non-A journals have high impact factors, but quite a few do. So I use that as preface to explain how I go about my research puzzle choosing. It's guided by both A and B. And in fact, high impact journals, whether they're A or non-A journals, high impact journals, because that's actually quite a lot of non-A's as well as A's, I just said that, they want both of these qualities. And my sources of inspiration when I'm looking for puzzles are all peer refereed journals, A and non-A, events in news reports, events directly experienced and or observed by me, conflicting findings that need reconciling, anything provoking that gets me to think that needs correcting, and opportunities to work with great scholars. Sometimes I have joined projects just because I want to work with so-and-so. And in so doing, I become more aware of literature that perhaps, at least initially, I was not so expert in. Now, I'm going to give you some examples. The first one took almost all 6 of these. I don't circle 6 opportunities to work with great scholars because this first example is a solo authored paper. So this was one of my first publications. It's 1991 Administrative Science Quarterly, ASQ. And I want you to see how I justified the study that this paper regards. First of all, it's titled The Effects of Explanations on Negative Reactions to Deceit. What I say in the opening page is I chose this context, the context of deceit, as when people are lied to, when you learn that someone has been deceptive, and then you get an explanation. Under what circumstances are you more likely to respond positively instead of negatively to the person who has deceived you? That's the context. And I say I chose this context because many current events, these were current at the time, just as before I got this published, including the Iran scandal, the HUD scandal, the financial scandals of the Keating Five, and numerous investment banking related scandals, indicate that deceitful acts and their exposure are issues relevant to management. That's one of my reasons for justifying this study. I go on to quote a number of academics who have studied reactions to deceit that indicate people get very angry. And then I go on to say, given the strength of the negative outcomes often experienced by those who discover others have acted deceptively, the context of exposed deceit should offer a rigorous test of the mitigating effects of explanations. Now, another example I wanted to show you is my study with Jean Brett and Ann Lytle, which was in Academy Management Journal in 1998. It's titled Breaking the Bonds of Reciprocity in Negotiations. It opens, our opening sentence is, and it goes on, you'll see, I'm going to highlight it for you, a bunch of news-related events. We say escalated conflicts are common within and between organizations, costing significant time, expense, frustration. And then we give a bunch of examples. They're boxed here. And among them is Hong Kong's Cathay Pacific Airlines, which had a 17-day strike after they terminated 3 employees. That strike cost upward of $15 million. I'm reading what it says here, and causing major disruption of holiday flights during the busiest season of the year. The dispute between Chrysler and the United Auto Workers Union, which escalated to a month-long strike before being resolved, cost employees jobs and cost Chrysler the production of 71,000 vehicles worth about $300 million in profit. By the way, when I'm looking for news stories or quotes to use, I usually want as specific as possible to make the whatever I'm using as examples related to phenomena that I want to study as vivid and as urgent and as interest-grabbing as possible for the reader. We go on after giving a variety of even more examples. I think we could talk about Viacom, Blockbuster. We say conflicts of this magnitude are damaging to organizations. Parties on both sides are aware of the cost of conflict, yet they appear to be unable to avoid the spiraling escalation that results in these costly outcomes, and unable to stop the escalation once it's begun. And we use that. We then go to the formal definition of conflict spirals offered by Tom Schelling, actually a previous IACM Lifetime Achievement Award winner. And we go on to say that the purpose of this paper is to study how to avoid or break conflict spirals. We could have opened by just going straight to our purpose and then justifying it with theory, but I think the way we instead opened with these news events is far more interesting. Here's another example. It's more recent. It's a Journal of Management, which I published in 2023. It's titled How Leaders Drive Followers' Unethical Behavior. And the key word in the title is leaders. And we emphasize that the ethics literature tends to put leaders in the role of disciplinarians. And the folks that are typically deemed unethical are the employees, lower level employees, for whom the leaders need to give, discipline. We start our article, the very first sentence, with news reports of organizational scandals often include organizational leaders' encouragement of subordinates to commit unethical acts on behalf of their organization. And then we give a bunch of examples. We name them: high-profile scandals, Enron, WorldCom, HealthSouth, Purdue, Pharma, Theranos, Arthur Andersen, and more. The next paragraph goes on to say there's some scandals not so high profile, but they exist too. But then we point out that despite the commonality of leaders' encouragement of unethical behaviors and calls for more studies, this area remains scarcely studied. And so to address this limitation, so there we go. We kind of set up the puzzle and then say how we're going to solve it. And we say we're going to introduce a new concept in this article called leader immorality encouragement. And as an aside, I wasn't actually planning to talk to you about this, but I and my co-authors, we debated a lot with each other what to call this phenomenon. And we had many names before we settled on leader immorality encouragement. And at the risk of seeming boastful, I was the one that came up with leader immorality encouragement. And why? Because I like the acronym LIE, because it's really about deception. So even choosing your construct names, if you're introducing something new, in a way that makes them easily understood and memorable, is a great idea. I want to talk a bit about this article, Business on a Handshake. It was one of my first, 1992, published in the Negotiation Journal with Blair Shepard and Lisa Traskin. In it, we introduced 3 types of trust: deterrence-based trust, knowledge-based trust, and identity-based trust. And we argue that of the three, the one that's most transactionally efficient is identity-based trust. This journal, the negotiation journal, highly respected. I think we all know it. We use it to teach our negotiation classes. It's a Harvard journal, but it's by consensus, it's not A, and its impact factor actually is not 4 or higher. So from many metrics, it's not an A journal. This article of mine has been cited nearly 2,000 times. It's one of my highest cited articles. I look at where it's cited. It's in these top A journals: ASQ, AMR, AMJ, JAP, SMJ is Strategic Management Journal. I also saw it in Information Systems Research, very respected journal, Journal of Business Ethics, and in the Annual Review of Psychology. Of course, other places. I just chose what I thought you might readily recognize as very respected journals. And the scholars associated with the articles that cite this particular piece of mine are also top scholars. Their names are on the screen. I think you have heard, and maybe you personally know quite a few of these. Among them, Sim Sitkin, Roy Lewicki, Bob Beese, Jason Colquitt. Why am I saying this? Not to brag, but to make this point. If I can get my screen to do it. Yeah. Never would I have written this paper if I had thought, I can't do this, since the negotiation journal is not an A journal. So I want to now move to a different issue, but it still relates, I think, to how to make our work highly rigorous, both theoretically and in terms of relevance. What is the consequence of drawing? And I do mean drawing circles and arrows, theoretical models to depict scholars theorizing. So here's your choice. It's not a poll. Just think about it. A, it strengthens the theorizing and its relevance, or B, it constrains the theorizing and its relevance. I mean, drawing, I have to tell you, it's not always easy to try to capture what we're thinking in a picture. So here's my thinking on this. If the model drawing accurately reflects the theorizing and uses easy to understand construct labels, I do think it strengthens the theorizing as well as its relevance. And in fact, to get the model to be truly accurate in a way that whatever you're theorizing can readily be seen in those arrows and circles. It's not, there's no disconnect. That's really hard. So striving for that accuracy, that's why, at least for me, it always strengthens my theorizing. Just attempting to get the drawing, the theoretical model, to match what I, in words, am theorizing. And then finding easy to understand contract labels allows hurried readers, which really everybody is, at a glance when they see the theoretical model, to understand what it's saying. So here's an example. I'm going back to my Journal of Management paper currently. Actually, I can't remember if it's still in press. It might be out now. It was published in 2023. We wanted to understand, why does leader immorality encouragement ultimately get employees behaving unethically? And we started with this assumption. If a leader basically encourages an employee to engage in UPB, unethical, pro-organizational behavior, that's not our term, that's another term that's in the literature, then the employee is going to think, oh, the leader's asking me to do this, then the leader's probably going to reward me for doing this. So that's the plus sign. The very first plus sign is that if a leader engages in immorality encouragement, encourages employees to stretch the truth or to hide the truth, to do things that make the organization look good, employees are going to think or expect that they'll be rewarded for doing that. That's the first plus sign. And then if they think that, they're going to be more likely to do it. That's the second plus sign. That's where our story starts. And then we go on to say, we think the other thing that happens is when employees see a leader, keyword leader, encouraging them to do these unethical things to make the organization look good, that's going to increase moral disengagement. The employee is going to assume, well, the leader wants this, it must be okay, morally okay. So that's the plus sign you see on atop the other one. And on the far right side of this, once I'm morally disengaged, I no longer think this unethical behavior is bad. I'll do it. So there's another plus sign there. And then we found ourselves thinking, well, why else might this happen? If the employee has a particularly high quality relationship with the leader, which our literature refers to as LMX, then they're going to trust that leader more and therefore be more likely to expect that the leader is going to treat them well, reward them for doing what is being requested. And we think the same is true for moral disengagement. If the person telling you to do things that you know are unethical but will make the organization look good, UPB, if it's a leader and you have a high quality relationship with that leader, then you're especially likely to think that leader must think this must be a fine behavior because the person asking me to do it is someone I trust. So that will strengthen the likelihood that LIE will lead to moral disengagement. And then we thought that the relationships just described would be even stronger if the leader is high in status as opposed to low in status. And this is our full model. Now, are there other things that could explain UPB? Yes. So it's not like we don't think that there are. We do. We think about them. We always, when I'm doing anything, talk about what other influences could exist on our ultimate outcome of interest, and we treat them as control variables. If you try to draw everything in the model, it becomes spaghetti, and then the storyline disappears. And that's why drawing the model, and let me tell you, we had many iterations of this before we settled on this one. We decided that we wanted the theorizing to really center around leader qualities, which I think you would agree it does. So key points that I was hoping you would get from what I've shown you. Should scholars avoid or embrace events reported in the news as sources of inspiration for the puzzles they pursue? I personally embrace them. It's served me well. I encourage you to do the same. Yes or no, should scholars use academic journals as their primary source of puzzle selecting inspiration? And if yes, should these journal sources be only, keyword only, italicized, underlined, only A journals? I believe fervently no. And I ask you here, why would you so severely restrict your potentially many sources of puzzle finding inspiration? It just doesn't make sense to me. And of course, the first two issues raise the question, what precisely is an A versus non-A journal? And I think you would agree, it's really hair splitting, which is another reason I don't think it makes sense to limit yourself to only A journals. And in fact, I think the ultimate distinction between them is consensus-based. And by the way, we, all of us, as academics, as scholars, we're part of that consensus. And that's why I know it's all easier said than done. But this practice of trying to limit people to only A journals, not just where to publish, but even what to cite, I've heard people say that you should be only citing A journals. I think it's dangerous. I think it's not wise. And from a creative standpoint, it's limiting. Does drawing theoretical models enhance or constrain scholars' theorizing and its relevance? I believe it enhances both theorizing and its relevance, but only if the model drawing accurately reflects the theorizing and uses easy to understand construct labels. By the way, one of the ways I also try to make labels easy to understand, I always make sure that the actor is named. So it's either employees something or management's something or customers. Often I see labels that it's not clear who the perception or emotion belongs to, and that's confusing. So I try to avoid that. I also check how easy to understand my own models are by showing the model to diverse readers. And when I say diverse, I mean not just academics in my field, but other fields and even lay people. I actually find sometimes my best advice on how to simplify something or to make the storyline more interest grabbing, sustaining, or understandable is to get folks that are not academics to give me some feedback on it. So here again on the screen are all the sources of inspiration I try to draw from. And I just wanted to say one more thing before I'm actually about to stop talking and give you a chance to maybe ask me some questions if you haven't already. Maximizing idea-inspiring sources, hence using all of the below, enhances research passion and thus continuously active researching. It makes the research more fun, and that helps to fuel continually doing it. And that is my pearls of wisdom. So I think I'm going to stop sharing and give you all a chance. Maybe Brandon, you, if you see the questions, to ask me some questions.
Yeah, so I want to thank you for that. As a, beyond being executive director of IACM, I'm a second-year doctoral student after all these years in academia and running organizations. So this was phenomenal because, just the focus on, I do think there's a tendency, especially when you're, at least in my case and my cohort, being in a doctoral program, there is this just gravitation towards restricting the sources that we pull from. That A's are A's and everything below, we just cast it aside when we're doing our theoretical review, lit review, whatever.
Right.
So really phenomenal. I'm actually looking forward to sharing this with my cohort after we're done editing it and uploading it. So we do have a question, and just as a reminder, please post the questions in the question and answer box if you can. But we do have one. What has been the most challenging publication process you've faced, and how did you overcome this challenge?
That's a great question because so many of them have been challenging. I have to say, at the risk of now seeming maybe too Pollyannish, I actually find the reviews themselves very helpful. Even when it's a rejection, no one likes a rejection, and I certainly don't like them, and I've gotten a good share of my own. But I really take the reviews substance, which usually does include not just critique, but suggestions for how to improve things. I take those very seriously, and I think I just do whatever it takes to be able to say, I always say to whoever my co-authors are, our response letter for every comment that's there should always start with, as you requested, comma, we blank, and the blank goes, we did what you asked us to do. And I think that's really my general strategy. But I think the other thing is, if the critique was that my logic was wrong, if I still fervently believe my logic is right, then it just forces me to go back to, I guess, library sources or whatever it was that was feeding my thinking, and to see if I can find support for a counter view. And then if it really does exist, work that into the storyline and then explain, if I can, why I think my view is more accurate. And then if there really are counter views, find a way to test the counter views empirically, which might not have initially been in the paper. Now, you asked me for a particular publication, and I'm not sure one comes readily to mind. I will say, I mentioned the Brett Shapiro Lytle paper, 1998 AMJ. That was very time-consuming because our data was audio-taped negotiations that we content coded. And if any one of you, I'm guessing this audience, the answer would be yes, has done content coding, you know how grueling that is. And that was not an easy publication. It took quite a while before we finally got our yes. I'm seeing in the Q&A window some questions. I don't know if I should go to those.
Yeah, so I'm gonna follow up with those now. We've got two sitting in there.
Okay.
Could you talk us through how you decided on the model you described, and how did you end up deciding that you wanted to focus on the leader characteristics?
Okay, great question. I will say that I usually start my drawings by drawing on my own intuition. And I know there might be some people who think, what? That's atheoretical, but it's a starting point. That is, for me, I think, where I usually start. I ask myself, well, what would I do if my leader encouraged me to do things that I knew were not ethical, but would make the organization look good? Under what circumstances would I be more versus less likely to do it? And so I think I personalize it. And then after I get the drawing, first draft, drawn with that, just drawing on intuition, then I'll go to the literature and I'll ask myself, is there anything that I can cite that supports my arrows? The arrows are, in essence, ultimately the hypotheses. And usually helped by, even if it's just rough draft drawing, I will find sites to justify the arrows, which then, once I start narrating them, become my theorizing. And I think what happened with that particular model was we found ourselves realizing, gosh, so much of this is leader qualities. So we found ourselves realizing, and reviewers are always going to ask you what theory guided your choice of variables, that we probably needed to position our storyline within the leadership literature. And so then we just began reading literature that we thought would help us justify under what circumstances people generally comply with any leader request, not just an unethical one, but anyone. And that helped us to arrive at the variables that we did.
So let's stick with the topic of the model.
Okay.
How do you think about constructs in the model in addition to the key question? And where do those come from? Are they largely from literature, news articles, both?
So I have to say, I really do find news, particularly recently, very emotion provoking. And I will admit, I think that's partly why I became a justice researcher. If ever I'm reading or seeing news that makes me feel a sense of injustice, it tends to instantly make me think, how can I either how can I study that? How can I make sure whatever that behavior is that I find upsetting can be less frequently seen in organizations, including, for example, deception. And so I do think for me, news might be my starting point. And then I do draw on intuition. And then from there, I look at the literature to see if there's a way to justify the story that, at least intuitively, from a starting point, I was thinking I wanted to tell. And I'm seeing a question from someone I have known for a long time, starting in Chapel Hill when she was a doctoral student there, and I was a new assistant professor, Robin Pinkley.
We do. We have a question from Robin,
Yeah.
and she starts off with "Hey, love." Now, I'm going to pretend that "Hey, love" was for me, actually. Most of my work most of Robin's work is counterintuitive, which are the puzzles that she loves. But it's extremely tough to disprove current theory because journals want us to use theory to support the idea, and typically sends it out to the authors of the theory that we are challenging. This is a huge problem, and it leads us to be a field that's focused on proving my theory instead of finding the truth. What are your thoughts on this?
So let me just say, I share your frustration because I've had that too. I do believe that if your theory is counter to one that's out there, that the best way to handle it is to acknowledge the counter view and to design a study that it's basically a competing prediction story, and then to show under what circumstances the theory you believe is more accurate is more supported. And in fact, that is what I did in some of my earliest work, actually, with Jean Brett. I think that was our 1993 JPSB. There were a bunch of theories for why do people like voice, having the chance to give their opinion to management when decisions are being made. What is it about voice that makes it justice enhancing? And there were debates about whether it was because people want to be influential, which is an instrumental explanation, or it makes them feel valued, which is a non-instrumental explanation. And we designed a study that allowed us to test competing predictions, even though we personally held a view that one of those views was more accurate.
Excellent. So we've got another one here. There are a lot of fascinating research puzzles that are interdisciplinary and mixed methods. How have you navigated the refusal of some journals in certain disciplines to consider multidisciplinary mixed methods research? Did you proceed regardless? Did you adjust how your puzzle? Did you adjust your puzzle in advance to speak to the specific discipline? And there was many greetings from the Organizational Sciences Department in Amsterdam.
Right. You know, I will say, and maybe I've just been lucky, I've heard people say that they have trouble publishing multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary research. And for me, it's always been well received. And I think more journals now are, at least I've heard, they want more interdisciplinary kinds of research questions. So I'm wondering, Charlotte, if maybe you'll have an easier time now than you did in the past. I don't know. But as far as what I would do, I always let the puzzle drive everything, because if I have to water down the puzzle in a way that no longer feeds my passion, it's just grueling. So no, I think I would look carefully at what the critique is. I can't imagine it's just that it's mixed methods. That by itself doesn't make sense to me. I'm guessing it must be methodologically specific, and then I would try to change the method in some way to meet whatever the criticism is. So I see one also from Jamina. What if your intuitions are not supported by the data? At what point do you drop the research question? Well, I would say if you've got a bunch of hypotheses and only one or two or a minority of them are not supported, I think it's worth keeping them all. But if it's the majority, then there's a problem. But actually, I'm in the midst now of revise and resubmit, and one of the hypotheses was not actually we have two studies, and one study was supported and the other it was not. And in our discussion, talking about why we got mixed findings on that particular hypothesis in the two different studies, which were different methodologically, I think is one of the more interesting parts of our discussion. So no, I don't think I would just drop it. I think it depends on how much of the story is sorry, it's not significant versus it was significant.
So follow up on that, actually. Do you find that do you find such outcomes are more receptive today than they have been in the past? In terms of allowing you to, to find those silver linings in, data that does not come out to be significant?
So let me just say, no, definitely not. I find getting published in a journal is more difficult now than ever in my history. And it's gratifying only to hear, as I have, that others are finding the same struggle. So I try not to internalize it. It's very, very, very hard. What I said, and I do think this might be true, I think that there's more interest in interdisciplinary research puzzles. Puzzles that are approached with people with different disciplinary views. I think that's what our journals are beginning to want more of. But I don't know that for sure. It's just a sense. I'll admit, I think that in part because my own university is encouraging it, and not just my own business school, but the entire university. So it might be that that's why I have that worldview.
Excellent. Well, we don't have any other questions queued up. We are nearing the 45-minute mark. So if anybody has any, one last question here or anything along those lines, feel free to fire it away at this time. And we'll just give a couple of moments for that. But this has been a phenomenal session. I want to thank you for taking the time out. I want to congratulate you again for your Lifetime Achievement Award. And, what we're going to do for those who want to maybe view this again, to pull some information that maybe you missed the first time around, we will be just slightly editing this here and there, and then we'll upload it to our IACM YouTube page. And then we're going to share that out in the upcoming Signal issue of Signal, our fall, our newsletter. Well, our fall edition will be coming out in the next week or two, and we will embed that video in there as well. So be sure to be on the lookout for that. At this time, I think we're going to close out this session. Debra, if you have any final words for our attendees and for any viewers on our YouTube channel.
No, I just want to say I thank you for setting this up, for the people who are here. I've gotten some great questions. I'm getting some very heartwarming, some private notes and from people I love and respect. And I just, I feel very grateful to be part of this community. So, and Brandon, thank you for everything that you do to make IACM such a great community.
I appreciate that. So thank you everybody for taking out the time to join us. It was fantastic. I appreciate the questions. I appreciate our distinguished guest here for her time. And at this time, I'm gonna close down the webinar. I wish everybody a wonderful day. Take care.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Take care.